Sego, and welcome to Let's Talk with John Kane and normally Regan DeLoggins. No Regan this week. She got swamped with something to do with work, so she asked if I could take this one on myself, and I certainly will. She will be missed, and we'll have her back with us with us next week. Look, I do want to remind people, and I'll do this whether we are officially in fund drive mode or not, but we are always fundraising for WBAI. We are listener-supported radio, and we rely on your contributions, on your donations, on your continued support for this radio station and for programs like this. So I ask you to go to the pledge line, 516-620-3602. That's 516-620-3602. That's the number to call to make a one-time donation, become a BAI buddy. Do whatever you can. We realize that we are in a strange time with COVID-19, and there's been a lot of job loss. But even with the job loss, I know people have still do have some disposable income, and if you do, please dispose of some of it our way to keep us on the air and to allow us to keep you informed. And in the case of this show, oftentimes present a perspective that you're not going to get anywhere else. Let's Talk is a unique show in not just in New York City, in all of the East Coast, because we do offer a Native perspective, especially when you've got Regan and I both here, because now you've got two different Native people representing different types of people, gender, what nations we are a part of, all of that. Regan being somebody who lives in the city, myself joining and broadcasting from Seneca territory out in what most people consider Western New York. We definitely bring a different perspective. And so it's our pleasure to do so, but we need you to help us do that. So again, the pledge line, 516-620-3602. You can go online at www.give2wbai.org. That's GIVE, the number 2, WBAI.org, and you can follow the prompts there to make a donation. You can even do a text donation. So I'll remind you throughout the show, it's what we need to do to keep doing what we're doing. So, and look, we are, I'm always trying to make sure that we have our fair share of WBAI buddies that subscribe to this service. That way, we send a message to management. We tell people that through the amount of buddies that we accumulate and who list this show as the reason for becoming a WBAI buddy, it tells management that you support what we are doing, what we're bringing to you. So, all right, I've got to take advantage of the few, whatever the short amount of time is left before the Washington football team comes up with a new name to wear my parody shirt. So I'm wearing my my White Skins shirt. For those of you who are watching us on Facebook Live and perhaps checking out our YouTube video after our live broadcast, you see I've got my parody shirt on. And when I say it's the time is running short, is because the Washington football team officially, or made it official by announcing on Monday that they were retiring the name. I always like the way they say that. Retiring the racial slur that they've carried for a name for 87 years. They did so without having another name secured, by the way. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I've made my suggestions. We go with White Skins. We've seen Caucasians, Aryans. I even suggested, especially with all the murder hornet hype that there was, excuse me, perhaps the Washington Wasps. I'm thinking, yeah, that sends two messages. It's got a little bit of that white supremacy thing going on there, but it also has that thing that everybody's scared of. Everybody's scared of bees. Everybody's scared of wasps. Everybody's scared of hornets. And again, some people are scared of different kinds of wasps. But Washington Wasps, I kind of like that. But I also thought, looking at how fierce the head of a murder hornet looks, I thought, man, that would make a cool looking helmet. But anyway, enough about practical solutions. I do want to talk about the mascot issue. It is, we brought it up before, and Regan and I have discussed this. There's been this unique scenario that's played out since the tragic murder of George Floyd, where there is a real call to consciousness when it comes to anti-racism. Not just those who would say, "Oh, I'm not a racist," and I don't. I think everybody, all lives matter, all that stuff. No, since the murder of George Floyd, not only has Black Lives Matter really stepped up, and they've been able to pierce the veil of the white privileged to get them enlisted in this debate over racism. Because let's face it, there's been a lot of complicity. There's been a lot of looking the other way, or perhaps assessing that it wasn't your problem and that kind of stuff. But since the murder of George Floyd, a lot of conversations have gone beyond just police brutality. The statues issues, not just Confederate statues, but Columbus statues, and the mascot issue. So it almost seems like there's much more of an appetite for the general public. And I'm not talking about powers that be at this point. I'm just talking about the general public. There's much more of an appetite to hear perspectives that perhaps were never entertained before. And I think because of that, we are living in a bit of an unprecedented time, in spite of the unprecedented time that COVID-19 is offering up, in the fact that all of a sudden, it isn't just the activists, the normal native or black or brown activists. A lot more white people are joining in the fray. And I know, look, I've listened to people say, well, it's only really white people who are complaining about this mascot issue, being this whole idea of political correctness running amok and all that stuff. And that's not true. Look, we've been fighting this practice of mocking Native people for the amusement and entertainment of white people, for all intents and purposes, for 30, 40, 50 years. This isn't a brand new thing. We just haven't been heard. And in fact, to the extent that we've been raising this issue, we always get beat back by somebody doing some BS poll where they call a bunch of numbers and they ask, well, are you Native? And somebody says, oh, yeah, I'm 132nd Cherokee. My grandmother was a Cherokee princess. And so they'll say, oh, okay, we're going to list you as a Native person. So then they come up with these poll results where they say, oh, 90% of Native Americans polled don't think the Washington football team's name is offensive. Well, you didn't call me. and you didn't call Native people living on a Native territory. And I'm not saying we're the only ones that matter, but if you just call somebody who just self-identifies without any, without providing any documentation or detailing any connection they have with the Native people culturally or anything else, you're just getting somebody, you can even fill out a census. Every one of you who fill out the census, I won't be, but any one of you who do, you can actually list that you're Native American on the census. And all of a sudden, our population is going to double or triple, even though our population doesn't double or triple. It'll only double or triple because there's no verification needed. You just put down your Native American on their chart, and all of a sudden, everybody who claims, who has some weak, I'm not just talking about Elizabeth Warren, but yeah, Elizabeth Warren, all these people who have no real connection to Native people will say, well, yeah, I'm proud of the fact that I'm, 132nd or 164th Native American, and as a Native American, let me tell you this. And so then they want to speak for us. So these polls all come out that, that are completely disproportionately supportive of this racist mockery. And of course, every Native organization, every nation, every organization, every Native publication, they've all come out. They've all come out against the not just the Washington football team's name, the racial slur, but the practice of utilizing Native people for mascots. And I'm going to talk a little bit about it as we go forward, because the debate always is, well, yeah, we think that the Washington football team's name was offensive, but there's nothing wrong with the Chiefs or the Braves, and some people even try to justify the Indians. Even though it is clearly a misnomer, that's a mistake of Columbus that seems to carry on forever. That's not what we are. And so they use these names and then use images that represent us, or they claim, usually they're bastardized representations, and then white people have fun with it. They get to play Indian for a football game or a baseball game or even a basketball or a hockey game. They can no, it's taboo to wear blackface in public, but man, you can still wear red face. You can go. I mean, you can put red face on. You can go anywhere. You can put feathers in your hair. You can, wear beads, and you can mock native dances. You can do all kinds of things that's okay if it's directed towards native people. Now, we would never accept that with many other cultures, and it is unacceptable. There's no question how people look. Political careers have been jeopardized, if not ruined, over things like blackface. But you can still put your mom's lipstick across your face and call it war paint and go to a football game, and it's perfectly acceptable. Hell, they'll even put you on TV if you're outrageous enough. So the Washington football team announces that they're retiring the name, and again, they haven't secured another name. There was a bunch of names floated around. Some of them still with native references, like Warrior, which is probably going to be dismissed. But there's been a few, like Red Tail, referring to the Tuskegee Airmen, the Monuments, the Red Hawks. There's been a few names like that. Again, I kind of like the Wasps, but we'll see what they come up with. And time's running short. I mean, in order to secure these names, and apparently some Washington football fan locked in a bunch of names by registering a bunch of Washington such and such names. And I think he's got 4 of the more popular names that are being considered that he's registered. Apparently he's willing to give them up, but it does complicate the issue. So again, we have been battling this thing, and not just with the Washington, the nation's capital, the billion-dollar franchise from the nation's capital. We've been battling this at the high school level. Donna Fan Boyle has joined me many times on the program. We've talked about Neshaminy High School in Langhorne, Pennsylvania. There are local schools right around New York. I mean, the tri-state area that may not bear the R word for a name, but they have Indians or Warriors or Redmen or Red Raiders or some other reference. And of course, to really bastardize the image, they go the Hollywood route, and they just use a standard image that white people would recognize as an image representing Native people, even if we don't. So regardless of where the territory is, where the community is, and what Native people were indigenous to that area, they're always going to use the Plains Indian headdress. They're always going to try to have the fierce warrior or fierce chief, even if the schools whose job it is to educate people about this stuff don't ever address who the Native people were, what the governing structure were, the whole chief thing, whether we were a people of war or a people of peace. I mean, as Haudenosaunee, we pride ourselves on our ability to make peace, not war. But no, that fierce warrior is what we got to have. Why? Because that's what they wrote about. That's what they did, the Westerns. That's what Hollywood talked about. So that's the image that's great. So that's the stereotype, and that's the way for over 100 years. Washington football team had that mascot for that nickname for 87 years. For all that time, this image continues to be perpetuated. It's a stereotype. It's an inaccurate stereotype. But see, once you create that stereotype, accuracy doesn't matter because it becomes the standard. You don't know how many times, and I'm sure Regan can speak to this. I know every Native person I know, we've always been confronted with a white person's view of what a Native person should look like. Do we look Native enough? Do we wear feathers? Do we live in a teepee? All these stupid stereotypes. And we get confronted with it continuously. And look, I do public events, and not only do I do this show, but I do screening events, and I've spoken at universities and different places, and it is always the same conversation. Oh, I didn't know you were Native, or they want to ask, how Native are you? Like, are you full? Well, and so we get confronted. Why? Because we aren't living up to the stereotype image that has been promoted by Hollywood, by mascots, by cartoons, all of that stuff. So there's damage that gets done because we become invisible. In fact, when I've done speaking engagements, until I identify myself publicly to somebody, they had no idea. And then when I say that I'm that I say I'm Gunyagahaga or Mohawk, when I identify who I am, that's all of a sudden the eyes roll back and like, I didn't know. It's because they can't see us. We are invisible. And that's why our voices hadn't been heard for 30, 40, 50 years on these subjects. Well, and again, and I directly attribute the work of Black Lives Matter in raising public consciousness to race issues. And again, let me address this. I've said it before. The Washington football team didn't change the name or drop the name because they grew a conscience. They didn't. And FedEx didn't grow a conscience, and nor did Nike or Walmart or Target or Amazon, none of them. What they did was they became aware that people have a lower tolerance for racism than they did before. And not just a lower tolerance, but they actually have a resistance that they're demonstrating towards some of these racist acts, including the mascot issue. So it is because of what they anticipate the cost of this shift in the public view of things that they took the stand, because it was going to cost them money. They told the Washington football team and the NFL, they didn't grow a conscience either. They told the Washington football team, it's probably time to get rid of that name. And it was all about finances. It was all about money. It was all about branding and brand value. So when a brand becomes associated with a racial slur and it's very, very tolerable, then it's okay. But when the tolerance for that racial slur or the practice itself starts to weigh on people, and it starts to being communicated not just by a native population that represents 0.7%, or maybe a percentage of people of color in various ways, and the few allies. But when all of a sudden more and more people are saying, that's really wrong. That's really wrong. And again, I attribute it to the Black Lives Matter movement, and I attribute it to, I don't know, and I jokingly, I guess, and I'm not really jokingly, but I refer to the awakening of an empathy gene in people once they saw what George Floyd had gone through. And it's Breonna Taylor. It's all of the people who have been brutalized by the systems of oppression. So, I think it's changed the way people view other people, especially people different from them. And so when I say that practice is offensive and that it mocks who I am, it mocks my culture, it mocks, even though you've twisted it and you've taken something from us and you've altered it and then you called it your own. It's really strange to hear white people say, "Oh no, I'm an Indian. I'm a red face. I'm a redskin. I'm this," and they try to own it. And then the level of offense. The crazy part is we get told, "Oh yeah, you guys got to toughen up. You guys got to have thicker skin. Why are you so easily offended?" The people who feel like we are taking this from them, man, they're screaming bloody murder. It is crazy listening to some of the public forums and some of the comments that have been offered up against guys like Mike Weiss, who has been an outspoken supporter of our protest of this. Some of the newspaper forums, the forums that on any of the social media associated with the news covering this issue. It's incredible. It is really incredible how very racist people become and outraged. And you always hear people say, "Well, aren't there more important things than the mascot issue?" Yes, and for you to bring that up suggests that you aren't addressing the more important things. And while many of us who are raising issues about a Columbus statue or the mascot issue or any other offensive act of racism, we're still talking about things like missing and murdered Indigenous women. We're still talking about pipelines that we're trying to shut down. We're still talking about the suicide rate and the substance abuse rate, all that stuff. We're talking about all of that. We talk about the foster care systems and what it's done to our children. And of course, we talk about history. We talk about the residential schools. We talk about, when we talk about Columbus, we talk about what he did, what he really did, not the myth that gets associated with him. So Yeah, when I hear sometimes even Native people say, well, I'm not going to get involved in that mascot issue. I don't think it's important. Well, the problem is if you dismiss this broad marketing campaign to pigeonhole us into a stereotype, you're not fully understanding what the damage does. Because it does relate to the sexualization of women. It does relate to the dehumanization of our people. And there's no question about that. It's been studied by psychologists and schools of psychiatry. It's been analyzed in many ways, and it always comes out as a negative. And the ironic part is the United States is one of the signatories to the UN Commission to End All Forms of Racial Discrimination. And yet, not only does the United States not step up, and have they not put pressure on things like the pro team based in the nation's capital, but the education departments haven't done much. They've done very little. I mean, it didn't matter whether it was Obama was in office or Trump's in office. There's very little done. I mean, we listened to. I remember having a debate with Suzanne Harjo because she is very aligned with the Democratic Party, and she's a strong advocate on Native issues, but. And I said, well, I thought Obama's comment on the Washington football team's name was weak. And she goes, oh, no, it wasn't. I said, yes, it was. I mean, he basically said, if I had a team, and if that team had a name that a significant number of people found offensive, I'd think about changing the name. Wait a second. You had 4 hypotheticals in one freaking sentence. He never came right out and said, the name is bad, it should be changed. And he could have done that in a lot less time instead of him trying to do his rhetorical mannerisms to drag something out so he has about 4 or 5 pauses. If I had a team, and if that team had a name, and and he also made it a numbers game, and if a significant number of people, let me clue you in, Barack, we aren't a significant number of people. If you add all of us up, compared to the white people in this country, we represent a very small percentage. So if it's a numbers game, we're never going to win that one. And a very wise school superintendent out here in Western New York in a school district called Lancaster, he said we should not be making social justice decisions in the same manner that you elect a prom queen. It shouldn't matter how many numbers there are. If it's wrong, look at it, hear the people who are saying it's wrong, understand that perspective. Even if you don't agree with it, understand it. And there's a difference between those two things. You don't have to agree with my perspective, but you have to understand that my perspective has value to me. And when somebody says, well, you shouldn't be harmed by it, you shouldn't feel offended. That's, I've said this before, that's like punching somebody in the face and telling them whether it should hurt or not. You don't get to decide if your actions against somebody or that affect somebody, you don't get to decide how much it affects them, how much it harms them, how much damage it does to them psychologically, physically, how much it impacts them generationally to their children. So, look, I am really glad that the Washington football team has dropped this name. And look, and I'm not sitting on pins and needles waiting for their new name either. I'm not. My expectations are pretty low. I suspect they are not going to use native imagery. Although I will say, somebody suggested that the president of the Navajo Nation suggested that they use code talkers, and what a terrible idea that is. What a terrible idea code talkers would be. I mean, for one thing, when I hear Native people say, oh, we used our language to help win the war. No, we didn't. They used our language so they could, perhaps save lives. But look, whether our languages were used as code for their radios against the Japanese, in particular, didn't turn the tide of the conflict. And while I don't question the bravery, although the judgment may be another question, but the bravery of Native people who were involved in this code talker thing, it wasn't as voluntary as people think it was. I mean, it was one of these deals where if a code talker was in any way likely to be captured, there were orders for U.S. soldiers to kill them because the code talker wasn't important. The code was. And you know what? The United States has spent, over 100 years trying to kill our languages. And when they decided that the language could be useful to their military, they still weren't interested in preserving our language. Not for us, not to be taught. In fact, the fewer people who knew it, the better. So, look, I was really offended, when Dan Snyder, the owner of the Washington football team, flew a bunch of code talkers out there, wrapped them up in Washington Redskins jackets and hats, and looking like Minnie Pearl with the tags hanging off and all that stuff. I mean, watching this stuff and trying to heap all of this Washington merch on these old men who probably aren't getting out of the house much, and we're probably thrilled to be flown into the nation's capital and be treated to a football game in luxury boxes and that kind of stuff. But what an exploitive piece of crap Dan Snyder is and was in that instance. And again, for the Navajo president who, and there's been some bad Navajo presidents, I gotta tell you, but for anybody without the consultation of their own people to suggest that, well, we're going to offer our images to be used again. Not only were we used as code talkers, and not only did the Washington football team use this, this image of a Native person for 87 years, we're going to offer it again. Well, it got rescinded and pulled back from the. I think the Navajo president got a bunch of grief over it, and he withdrew his suggestion. So I'm not optimistic on what the Washington football team is going to come up with, but I'm more interested in what the impact is going to be. Look, there are schools all over the United States. Even in New York State, there are two schools, one out near Utica called Oriskany, and one down in what they call the Southern Tier, down near the down near Hornell and that kind of area, called Canisteo Greenwood, that still go with the name, the R word as their name. And they haven't gotten rid of it yet. And there is, every time this becomes a national story, it gains a little bit of traction. But now that the Washington football team has dropped it, because what many schools, including the Chamonix High School in Pennsylvania, in Langhorne, PA, they'd always say, well, as long as the nation's capital doesn't think it's politically incorrect, then it must be okay. If it's good enough for the nation's capital, it's good enough for us. Well, you know what? It wasn't good enough for the nation's capital. In fact, any claim that any of this stuff had to do with pride or honoring, pride in us or honoring us or respect to us, no, it never did. It was always about them. It was always about white people grabbing something and making it their own so they could play Indian. Hey, look, we're at the bottom of the hour, so we'll take a break. I'm going to come back. I want to talk a little bit more about what schools will do, and of course, there's some pro teams out there with some names too that we still have not been properly addressed. So we'll talk about that and some other news as well. We'll get into when we come back. This is John Kane without Regan DeLoggins this week, and this is Let's Talk. We'll be back just after a little bit of tune. All right. Hey, if you're watching us on Facebook, you get to enjoy the sidebar conversations that Reggie and I still have because our mics are still on during that break. So have at it. That's Reggie and I keeping it real. Look, there are still several pro teams that have native mascots, and so the debate comes down to, well, but yeah, I get that the R word is a racial slur, but what about the Braves? That's nothing derogatory. Or the Chiefs or the Blackhawks or the Warriors. Well, see, this is what people don't understand. There was even a debate about the guy who crafted the logo for Washington. They said, well, the logo wasn't offensive. Well, the debate isn't just about whether the logo, like the Cleveland logo, is offensive, or the word, like the R word, is offensive. What people aren't understanding, it's the idea, it's the practice, it's the whole idea that white people can take pieces of somebody's identity, shape it to what they want it to mean to them, and then own it. And own it in such a way that 50,000 people in a stand can do some creepy tomahawk chop. Or, tens of thousands of people can go to a stadium, go out in public in red face. That an individual can go to either a hockey game or a football game, pull a rubber head out of a duffel bag, stick a sword through it, and of course this head is made up to look like a native. It's got feathers and it's got war paint, and across the face says red skin, dead skin, or black hawk, dead hawk, and hoist that thing up in the air. And you know what? Lo and behold, they put them on TV. See, that's what is offensive. It's the whole idea that a marginalized people, a people who've been a victim of 500 years of genocide, still are the victims of genocide. Because if you're trying to rob us of our identity by stereotyping us in a fashion that you want, of your choosing, then you are contributing to the process of eliminating us as a people. Because you're trying to put us, one thing, you put us into history. You want to suggest that we're a people that are bygone, that we're no longer here. So that has its own elimination. There are some people who would argue that if we're not mascots, if we're not used to mascots, then we're completely irrelevant. Well, I'll tell you, if you believe that, then that's exactly part of the problem. Because if you think the only relevance we have is being a dehumanized source for your mascotry, well, you just made my argument for me. So, look, we've seen the billboards get put up. The Kansas City Redskins are going to feed the Kansas City Chiefs booze and send them back to the reservation. That was on a church sign out in front of a church. We've seen get ready for another Trail of Tears. High schoolers putting up banners like that. The University of Colorado used that banner against the Florida State Seminoles. Get ready for another Trail of Tears. So this is what happens when you reduce a people to the dehumanization of being somebody's mascot, somebody's amusement. It is the definition of mockery. People say, well, mockery means that you belittle. Well, mockery is belittling, but it doesn't just mean that. What it means is that you're pretending to be something that you clearly are not, and that you usually do it. When Donald Trump gets up there and tries to mock a reporter who's got a disability, he's doing it to be funny. He's utilizing somebody's disability and trying to get a laugh at that person's expense. Well, that's what this is all about. So it doesn't matter if you're the Indians, the Warriors, the Redmen, the Braves, the Chiefs, the Mohawks, whatever you're calling yourself, what you've done is you've reduced a people to merely to your amusement and entertainment. And that's what is racist. See, it's always white people who control that. And of course, racism is a white thing. I mean, in the United States, the people with the power to rig the system, to name the teams, to run the newspapers, to the television stations, to either pass laws or not pass laws, that's still dominated by white people, folks. I know, in another 10 years or so, white people will no longer be the majority. But I guarantee they're going to be the largest minority still controlling every freaking thing until it all crashes. So, make no mistake about it. White people are the ones who promote this type of racist behavior. And in fact, you can look on any one of these chat pages, and you might find an occasional person of color. But by and large, you're going to see white person after white person after white person. White people complaining that they took Aunt Jemima off the market. They took her name. Oh, you robbed that from my childhood. You needed to have Aunt Jemima to feel fulfilled? Uncle Ben? The Land O'Lakes girl on the butter package? When I hear white people complain about this, I'm thinking, what are you, freaking nuts? I mean, how is it possible that you can lay claim to everything, and then if something does change, you feel like you've had something taken from you, and then you want to tell us that we're too sensitive. I mean, it is pretty incredible. And the thing about high schools, what you have is you have a certain age demographic. These 40 plus somethings, these guys who never quite made it in the sports, become a professional athlete. They thought they were great high school athletes. These women who were the prime cheerleaders, and now not so much. Now they're greeters at Walmart or something like that. And so they're living as in this idea of these glory days, right? So if you take any aspect of, now you won't see this if somebody says, "Well, we're going to change the name from the Bears to the Panthers." No, nobody gets upset over that. But if you take away this, where they've claimed that we're Indians, we're warriors, we're Redskins, you take that away from them, and they lose their freaking minds. And I say this not anecdotally. I mean, we had a school here out in Western New York that went through this, and of course Donna Fan Boyle, she's on my show often talking about the threats on her life. That there was a guy who just recently on Facebook basically called her a commie, C-U, and you can figure out the rest. There's a T and there's an N in there someplace. That's what they referred to her as, over this mascot issue, and suggested the only way to stop somebody like that is with violence. Literally calling for this woman, and I know Donna, she's a sweetheart. I mean, but this white supremacist guy literally calling for her to be violently assaulted, if not killed, because she's a commie, whatever. And that's literally what he was saying on Facebook. And so when you see this kind of vitriol come out over something like this, look, when we say this is an issue, your response is, this is not that big an issue to us. We should never have done this. We're sorry. We're going to change the name. But you become more impassioned in defending this racist practice than we are in calling it out. Because let me tell you, this racist practice damages your children too. Your children grow up ignorant because of this. And that is part of the problem. Your kids are supposed to be going to school to become enlightened, to learn something, to become more aware of the world around them, not having their vision and their intelligence narrowed and boiled down to something that is ridiculously stupid. I mean, you, the ones who are advocating this, are willfully ignorant, but you're causing your children to be ignorant because of your ignorance. And of course, this is, the basis of racism is ignorance in the first place. But I think it's really important that people understand that this is damaging. It does, there's a direct connection to stereotyping Native people and the sexualization of Native women. I mean, when you put up monuments to Christopher Columbus, ignoring the fact that he was sending 9-year-old girls to be sex slaves back in Europe, and that the first diseases that we ever encountered from white people were the ones that came with the rape culture, the venereal diseases. And the connection between dehumanizing Native people, even in mascots, and the rape culture and the feeling that you can just kill a Native person and get away with it, because you can. In many places, these are the kinds of laws that are never enforced. So, look, I can't emphasize enough that there is a connection to the poverty that we live in, because you don't see that. All you see is a head on a helmet. You don't see the real lives that we live because of American policy. You don't see what the life of a Native person is like. You think, oh yeah, they're all rich because they have casinos, or they're all drunks. Well, where the hell do you think the alcohol came from? So you've got these stereotypes that are either loosely developed by Hollywood or mascots or some other derogatory expressions that have been tossed around your way, and that's all you know. And then when you see us even when we have an intelligent conversation about something like this, you have already become so dug in on these issues that you can't hear us. And again, that's why I credit and I support Black Lives Matter, because all of a sudden, enough people heard us that FedEx and Nike and the NFL, they all said, wait a minute, this could cost us. Well, it does need to cost. It needs to cost Cleveland and Atlanta and Kansas City and Chicago and even Golden State. Even though I don't know what the hell their logo is, I think it's just a bridge. So why do you call yourself the Warriors? If
it's a bridge now. It used to be. If you don't mind me chiming in on this,
no, go ahead.
It used to be a native person on there when it was the Philadelphia Warriors.
Oh, sure.
But when they moved over, to San Francisco, they got rid of that maybe about 50 years ago, and they replaced it with the Golden Gate Bridge.
So, I mean, it doesn't even make sense to keep the name the Warriors if your logo is a bridge. I mean, it doesn't even make sense. You know, that was one of the other thoughts that I had about Washington. They call themselves the Monuments. Of course, the problem with the Washington name is also the Washington part. Because, you know, not only the Washington part, but think about this. Here's the nation's capital is named after a guy who promoted terrorism in the against the Senecas and the Six Nations. But the city is in the District of Columbia, named after Columbus. I mean, there's a lot of, racism issues. I mean, slaveholders and slave traders, associated with that name, without the team logo name or whatever else. So it's problematic anyway. Hey, one other thing I wanted to mention, for those who haven't been following it, after Trump decided to have an indoor event in Tulsa, Oklahoma, they have seen the largest spike in COVID-19 cases in the state of Colorado. And there has been some of the tracers that have determined that there is a direct connection to some of that spike to the events in Tulsa. I mean, look, not only were like 9 of his staff people, including his son's girlfriend or something like that, tested positive, but now the governor of the state is tested positive. Kevin Stitt, who is the governor, who happens to be part Cherokee, although you wouldn't know it because he's trying to screw all of the native people out of gaming revenue. But so the first governor, again, who happens to be part native in the United States, first governor of a state, has tested positive for COVID-19, and the likelihood is there's probably a connection between him and the folks who came out when Trump came out. I realize that some time has passed by, but when you think about the political circles that people travel in, it wouldn't surprise me. And of course, this was worse than even the stuff up in South Dakota, because at least South Dakota was outside. This was indoors, and although only 7,000 or 6 or 7,000 people showed up, those you talk about 6 or 7,000 people, that still could constitute a super spreader event, and that's what you have there. So it's going to be interesting to see, what happens, how ill Kevin Stitt gets, and what's going to happen with some of these states that have seen this tremendous uptick in a resurgence in the number of cases. I said early on that people had to be aware that the idea of flattening the curve doesn't eliminate the amount of people who are going to get sick. It just drags it out longer. And of course, the less you allow for like super spreader events, like political gatherings or church gatherings or whatever else, the more you can keep the transmission from spiking up real high. Well, look, we're going to head into August here, and there's a really good chance that by the time August comes around, there may be 100,000 people a day, adding to the numbers of people who have tested positive. I mean, it's been 70,000 or near 70,000 the last few days, and for all the global watch on places like Brazil or India or even Mexico, the United States is still the worst hot zone in the world. And it is that way because it's mismanaged. It's mismanaged by, at the state levels and at the federal level. So it will be interesting to see what happens when these elected officials themselves get sick. And look, I don't wish death on anybody. Well, I take it back. There's a few people I do wish death on, but I'm not wishing death on anybody specifically, right? In this line of thought, I'm not. But I'm not going to spend too much time thinking about it, otherwise I would start naming names. But what I will say is we are in a tough spot. And I've said it before, the worst is yet to come, if not from the disease, from the economic fallout of it. So hang on. I do want to spend some time. I know that Regan has pretty good fingers on the pulse of what's happening in New York. There's a concern over evictions. There's a concern over kids going back to school this fall. All of that stuff. So next week we'll probably get into that a little bit. I do want to remind people once again, that we are listener-supported radio. We need your support. I need your support. I mean, look, the way I get to have this show, the reason I have this show, and look, I love being able to do this for 2 hours, especially when we have, when we were in a different circumstance, we had phones that we could go to. But the reason I can stay on the air is because enough of you support the show to justify my airtime. But if you don't, they won't. So I need you to make a donation. Do it in the name of Let's Talk with John Kane, whether you do it as a WBAI buddy or whether you do a one-time donation. If you have the resources, if you can do something. And I want to remind people, this isn't money for me. This is money for the station. But it's a way of voting with your dollars. It's a way of telling the station management, I like this show. I like the commentary that's offered here. I love the perspective that comes from two people in Regan and John together. But that's the way you tell them. You tell them with your dollars. So go to the pledge line. Go to 516-620-3602. Make a donation. Make a one-time donation. Look, call it as often as you can and make a donation. And please, let them know you listen to Let's Talk with John Kane. And if you become a WBAI buddy, you can fill in a line there. This is being done. This donation is being made in the name of this show. Let them know what shows you listen to. But look, I'm not big on pitching premiums. I'm not trying to sell something. I mean, I'd love to give some stuff away, and I've got some books that I will do at some point. But maybe I'll just go through the buddy list and just surprise people, throw a book somebody's way. And I've got a number of things like that I could do. But I'm not trying to buy you. I'm trying to offer you a show that you want to listen to. And if you do want to listen to it, then please call 516-620-3602. Go to give2wbai.org and make a donation, a one-time donation, a text donation. Become a WBAI buddy. But do it to support WBAI, listener-supported radio. And, look, I know some of you are listening online at, WBAI.org, or you're watching us on Facebook live stream, or you're going to catch my podcast. Look, whenever you hear this program or you see this program, you can always make a donation. You can use snail mail. Somebody once told me that they don't want to be in the system. Well, you know what you can do? You go down to the post office and you get a postal money order. You can leave it pretty much blank, and you put it in the mail, and you mail it to WBAI. Reggie, what's the address there? I don't know if I got Reggie there or not. No, all right, but we'll post the address up anyway. But it's
no. You was asking me a question.
Yeah, the address to mail a check to WBAI. Did you get that?
Okay, I could do that. I can help you out.
Yeah.
On that.
So it's
for those
Pacifica.
yeah.
It's Pacifica, WBAI Pacifica, right? How did they do that?
WBAI Radio, WBAI Pacifica Radio, 388 Atlantic Avenue, 3rd floor, Brooklyn, New York, 11217.
All right, there you have it. So if you don't want to be in the system, and I'm not telling you to put cash in an envelope, but you can go down and get a money order from the post office. And look, if it's $10, $20, $50, $100, $1,000, whatever you can do, send it. And you know what? on the memo side of that thing, put Let's Talk with John Kane on there. But send it to WBAI and support this radio station. Idea. Support this radio station. Look, we are going to take a break here for news in just a bit. But again, consider what's happening in the world right now. And if you're one of those people who are hating on Black Lives Matter, understand that since the murder of George Floyd, there has been a good thing that's happened. There does seem to be empathy where there wasn't any before. All of a sudden, a certain piece and a larger piece of the general population, native, non-native, white, black, whatever, are saying, no, we need to stand up against racism. It's not enough to say you're not a racist. If you need to be an anti-racist. And I know there are people who listen to the station who hate it when we drop the R word, meaning the racism, right? Not the other R word. But it has such relevance to so much. So look, you can see the racism divide between Republicans and Democrats, between liberals and conservatives. Why is that? Why is the idea of a mascot, why does that become a right or a left thing? Why can't there just be enough compassion and sensitivity and sensibility to say, yeah, there are people who are offended by that, and I got to stand with them. I got to stand with those people. And we are those people. And I'm telling you, as a person who lives on a native territory, who knows native people, my family's native, I'm telling you that the practice of using native people for mascots is as offensive as blackface. It's as offensive as blackface. And why? Because it's the same damn thing. It's the same damn thing. So I want you to keep that in mind. Whatever's going to happen with the next sports season, whether you watch football or baseball or basketball or hockey, just keep in mind that there's no reason to exploit the image of somebody else for your amusement. This is John Kane, not with Regan this week, but with Regan next week. And this is Let's Talk. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week. Yahweh.